Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on this webinar around healthy aging and healthy aging research. My name's Pete Bauer. I work for the University of Manchester. I'm based in Greater Manchester, and I also work for various parts of what's called the National Institute for Health and Care Research, which is one of the major funders of health research in England. I do some work around older people and healthy aging research. Most of my research is based in general practice. And that's where I do most of the research work I do. But tonight, it's great because we've got an expert in aging and healthy aging, who's Professor Emma Vardy. Emma's a consultant geriatrician. She also leads on something called clinical frailty at the Northern Care Alliance NHS Foundation Trust, and she's an honorary professor at the University of Manchester alongside me. She's really one of the experts in healthy aging. She's the aging specialty lead for our local clinical research network, and also the deputy lead for healthy aging theme within the Greater Manchester Applied Research Collaboration. So she's really, we're really lucky to have Emma along here today to talk to us about healthy aging. First, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for the excellent questions you've all sent in. We were chatting to Emma before, and she was saying how good the questions were, how challenging they were. And Emma's worked incredibly hard this week to try and answer those questions over the next hour. But thank you so much for those. Great to see those questions, and really interesting stuff. And I hope we will have some opportunity to answer those tonight. If you want to ask questions during the event, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can use that to ask questions, and I will try and pick some of those up at the end of the session if we've got time. So if there's additional questions you want to ask, put them in and we'll try and get to those. Can't promise, but we'll do our best to pick all those up. Now, I hope you can all hear me okay and see me okay. To ensure the best quality, we've made sure that everyone's cameras and microphones are turned off. If they appear to be on, please turn them off, because it just makes it easier to run the session and make sure everyone can hear us correctly. Just to say, I know people may have questions about their own medical conditions. We're not in a position to answer those about individual cases. So if you've got concerns about your own health, please talk to your healthcare professional in the first instance. This is about general issues to do with healthy aging, but I hope you'll find it all very interesting. So tonight it's being recorded, and you'll be sent a copy of that recording. The event's been organised by the National Institute for Health and Care Research, what we call the NIHR. And that's a government-funded body that funds research into the NHS, into public health, and into social care. Okay, so if you're interested in taking part in research looking at healthy aging, you can register with something called Research for the Future. You can also learn more about research and search for studies to take part as be part of research website. The links for these two things have been in the email that was sent to you with the login details. So if you're interested in taking part in research and learning more about research, please follow those links. Okay. Hopefully that's okay, and we can get started with the session today. So Emma, welcome to this evening's webinar. I'm now going to pass over to you to start your presentation. And I'm just going to kick off by flagging some of the questions that were raised to Emma. So we've tried to put these into themes, and the first theme is around general aging. And just to give you a flavor of some of the excellent questions we had questions. What problems are the normal results of aging? Can improvements to healthy aging be made at any age? A really interesting question, can lifestyle interventions trick biology? And finally, what are your recommendations for improving the healthy age span? So that's a taste of some of the questions that you posed to us. And as I said, Emma's been working very hard on trying to find answers to those. So Emma, over to you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, just to re-emphasize that disclaimer, definitely not personal medical advice I'm providing here. And yes, you did put me through my paces in terms of trying to answer as many of your questions as possible. So to answer that first group of questions, there's various different themes that I'm going to cover, and hopefully I will have answered by the end those specific queries that people had. And this is a really kind of fun little tool that I had a little play with, which so I am a 49-year-old female, and I put into it, you can get it through the Office of National Statistics, and it calculates my average life expectancy as being 87 years, but it also shows the chances of me getting to 99, which is 1 in 10, and 100, and I do stand a chance. So I'm just sorry, just a slight technical issue. Moving on. So putting this into context, there are increasing numbers of older people. This graph shows you how the population is aging and how the demographics are shifting. So the kind of the filled out parts of the graph are the age spread going from 5 years up to over 100 years for 2020. And you've got females in the turquoise and males in the blue, and you can see how that demographic is going to shift with that extra outline over the top, showing that our population is aging. So the number of people aged 85 years and over in 2020 was around 1.7 million. But by 2045, it's projected to almost double to just over 3 million. So that'll be almost 1 in 20 of the population. But that age and that aging, the really important bit is the healthy aging. So how long can we expect to live a disability-free life? And you can see that unfortunately this isn't quite such good news. That is projected, that has been going down over the last decade or so, and women worse more than men. So I just wanted to get over this concept of normal aging versus and healthy aging and unhealthy aging, if you like. So there are a number of processes that happen in our bodies, and that would be a whole talk in itself. But just to give you a flavour, so some of these you'll know about, some of these might be a bit less familiar, but there are changes in our bones, in our muscles, in the amount of adiposity, or that means sort of fat cells, fat tissue. There are sensory changes, changes in our eyesight, our hearing, changes in our brain, and it's not all bad news. There are changes in our brain, but there are new nerve pathways that form in our brain. It's called plasticity, and that happens up till our 80s and 90s. We go through hormonal changes, so women go through the menopause. And there are other changes in our body, also at a cellular level. So there are changes in how long the cells in our body live, and that's also affected by genes. And there are some genes that switch on and switch off that affect cell survival. But many of these things are part of normal age. All these are part of normal aging, but there is a difference between healthy and unhealthy aging. And some of that is contributed by other conditions that you might develop. So frailty, which I'll talk more about in a moment, something called sarcopenia, which is like a disease process of the muscle. Dementia, which you'll have heard, you no doubt be familiar with, and osteoporosis. So that's a disease of thinning of the bones. And all of those things contribute to whether we're going to age healthily and be more independent or increasingly dependent. So frailty, I know this is not a very popular term, but it is something that we use in the clinical setting, and it's really helpful in providing the very best care for older people. So it's a long-term health condition. About 1 in 10 people over 65 will have frailty, and about half of people over 80. And it's to do with us becoming losing some of our strength. If we become frail, we might not be able to endure exercise and physical activity as much. Our bodies can't spring back from things like chest infections and other illnesses. And it means that we're less likely to be able to recover from relatively minor health events, and we're vulnerable to other health outcomes. And one of the reasons why this is important, it contributes to that disability-free period of life, but it also costs quite a lot in terms of our health service. So it's received quite a lot of extra attention. And there are some things that are linked with frailty. So falling over, hearing and vision problems, not being as active, polypharmacy, that means being on lots of different tablets, smoking predisposes you. But again, it's not all bad news. There is a stage before frailty called pre-frailty, and there's research going on in Manchester, something called the Signpost to Health study, that's looking to see whether we can prevent people moving from pre-frailty to frailty. It's also, it doesn't all just move in one direction. So we used to think that people would go from mildly frail, moderately frail, severely frail, but actually we've discovered that people can move and people can improve in terms of their frailty level. And there is good evidence for interventions. And this is the first time, but definitely not the last time, that you'll see exercise mentioned. So there's something called a clinical frailty scale score, and it's a score from 1 to 9 that goes from 1 very fit up to 9, which is terminally ill. And we use that in our hospitals and community services to make sure that we tailor the care we provide to different people. So this is a really interesting research study about frailty reversal in primary care through GPs. There's a little picture of the elixir of life. Somebody did ask me about a medication that they'd heard about to do with anti-aging, and I'm sorry, but unfortunately there isn't one medication that is going to reverse the aging process. But this study did show that of the people who were randomized to 20 minutes of exercise a day and a diet with a particular protein content, they found that there was reversal of frailty over the 3-month study period, a change in the bone strength, and also improved activity levels. And what they found was, in terms of something called chronological age, which is how long you've been on this earth, or biological age, which is how old something is in physiological terms. And they found that in the group that had that exercise and diet intervention, that there was 7-month age difference in that intervention group who had those interventions. So genes, there was a question about can lifestyle trump genes or vice versa? Well, there are a number of genes. We're born with those genes, and they are the genetic code for how our cells behave, how our bodies work. They characterize things like our hair color, our height, but there are some genes that can get switched on or off, and they can be switched on or off by things like exercise, attitude and mood, your diet, and that's called a particular specialty area called epigenetics. And there are some protective genes that can be switched on. Now, I've taken some of this information from a book written by a colleague, Professor Roseanne Kenny, who's based in Ireland, who's written a book, an excellent book called Age Proof. And also in it, she talks about something called the Nun Study. So that was a group of nuns in America. And what they did was they recorded the mental attitude of those nuns as they came into the convent, and they found that positive mental attitude could increase life expectancy by 10 years. There's also the ultimate genetic experiments, which involve twins, because they have exactly the same genetic code makeup. And what that's showed is that about a third of how we age, up to the age of 80, is determined by our genes, but the rest is about how we live, those environmental factors. And genes seem to play a greater role in you living to getting to 100. And I've shown this picture, and again, this is a quote from Roseanne's book. The picture is of two ladies, but what I would say is we could make a guess at how old they are. Are they a similar age? Is one younger than the other? But a lot of how we have lived, whether we smoked or not, all those things can show on our face, and you will look older, for example, if you've smoked throughout your life compared to if you haven't. And they've showed that with pictures of twins. So you wear your age on your face. There's also some really interesting research that the team from the magazine The National Geographic did. And what they found was that there were some blue zones, so areas of the world, 5 areas in the world where people have a higher number than usual of people who live longer than the average. And they looked at the factors that were common to those areas, and they called them the Power 9. And those things are having a purpose in life, having low levels of stress, being on a more plant-based, semi-vegetarian diet, not overeating, having moderate calorie intake, moderating the amount of alcohol you drink, especially wine, having regular physical activity, so being active on a day-to-day basis as part of their daily life, and also having engagement in spirituality or a religion, and being involved in family or social life. And so the take-home message to round off that section, hopefully I've answered as many questions, is our genes do play a part, but they need a little help. And actually it's those other aspects, lifestyle changes, external factors, that play a greater part. Our genes, though, will get us over to reaching some of those very much older ages.
Thank you, Emma. That was brilliant. Hopefully everyone found that a useful summary. And as Emma said, we've answered some of the questions you've raised around general aging. A kind of mix of positives and negatives there, I guess, Emma. Some, we're getting older. We're not necessarily living healthily older, but there's things we can do, relatively minor changes that can make a difference. So a mix of messages, but some positives there, I think, for everyone.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
never too
great.
late. Never
Never
too late
too
is the
late.
other
Never
message.
too late. So I think that relates to that
Yeah,
question about improvements be made at any
yeah,
age. That
yeah,
study would suggest yes. Never give up. There's always small changes
yeah.
can make a difference. So that's, I think, really useful for us all. So the next issue kind of relates to some of the stuff that Emma's been talking about. We had loads of questions on physical activity, and you'll be well aware that we're, as a nation, being encouraged to be more physically active. Some of the questions we had on this, some really interesting questions in relation to what's the best exercise for over 60s. Somebody said, as a recently disabled man with poor mobility and a certain age, how can I expect to lose weight and stay fit? So that issue about, how do you maintain physical activity when your own health and mobility starting to be affected? How can I remain healthy when I have continuing knee problems restrict my walking ability? So I guess the challenges really of how we can retain physical activity and maintain exercise as we get older. So Emma, back over to you and your views on this complex topic.
Yeah. So I'm going to explain a little bit of the science behind physical activity and some of the things that are at play, which will help some of the other what I'm going to say later make sense. So as we age, there are various processes that take place in our bodies. So one of them is, I mentioned that there's an increased amount of fat cells in our body, and that leads to something called inflammation. There is a reduction in the muscle in our body. So anything that we can do to increase the muscle, reduce the fat, is going to be really helpful. So that's where regular physical activity comes in. And there's evidence that it can affect the level of inflammation. You might not have expected to hear about space, but there are some really interesting experiments being done by the University of Liverpool on the International Space Station. And they're doing something called the micro-age experiment, where they're looking at the effect of an environment without gravity and what that does to muscle cells that are taken up into space. And what they've shown is that there are higher levels of inflammation if you don't have gravity, if you have less resistance. So that helps us understand about aging and showing us why exercise and physical activity is so important. And I'm using the term more physical activity as opposed to exercise, because when we talk about exercise, it can be really off-putting, me included. It implies that we will have to be sort of exert ourselves a great deal, and we'll have to get into our lycra and make particular efforts. But physical activity is about, moving about on a regular basis. And this is a quote from the UK Chief Medical Officer's physical activity guidelines that you can easily access online. And it says, if physical activity were a drug, we would refer to it as the miracle cure. Due to a great many illnesses, it can prevent and help treat. And it really is true. So it contributes to our health and quality of life. The more the better, but small amounts have benefits. In childhood, it contributes to muscle strength and healthy bones. So activity throughout life is really important. And one of the groups where activity levels fall off from childhood, but particularly in young girls and women. So we all have a role encouraging those around us, whatever age they are, to continue their activities. In adults and older adults, it's about maintaining strength, delaying the natural decline, the reduction in amounts of muscle and the density of our bones. And there's additional benefits in older people around being able to balance better and be more flexible, and that will reduce our risk of falls. And equally important, as important is spending less time sedentary, so sitting down. And if we are sitting down, there's evidence we should stand up regularly every hour or so, just as a general rule of thumb. Certainly not for prolonged periods, because all that increases your heart disease mortality, your cancer risk, and how long you'll survive. So prolonged sitting, even in those who exercise, is really harmful. So if you have an office job all day and then you go and do exercise, that office job sitting down, not getting up and about, is as important. I'm aware that you won't be able to see these in detail, but they will be really helpful for those people who are asking about physical activity for adults with disability or joint or other problems. And it gives various sort of tips and advice on keeping active. There's also that nice kind of infographic on the left about all the benefits of physical activity, and it gives guidance about how long per week and what sort of intensity and what type of exercises are good. And there were specific questions about the type of exercise. So some things might surprise you. Some things are better than others. And this again is from the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines. So, it might surprise you, for example, cycling doesn't tend to impact so much as, for example, ball games. So thinking about it's as much about enjoyment as well, but the type of exercise you do will contribute to different improving your strength, improving your balance, improving your bone health. Again, to link it back to some of the research, there's a lot of research in this space. This is a list of some of the studies that are going on in Greater Manchester, but also other sites across the country. A lot of these are around reducing our risk of falling, and also studies going on around what some of the changes that happened during the COVID pandemic. This is about an app called Keep On, Keep Up, which is, you can see an example of the animation. It's been developed at the University of Manchester by one of my colleagues, Emma Stanmore, and there's proven benefit for reducing falls, for increasing strength and balance. The research is ongoing, but what's nice, you can download it as an app onto your phone, Android or Apple, and it will give you advice that's relevant to whatever level of sort of fitness you are. It also has some health games as well, and we're developing it also for people with who suffer with dementia. So that rounds off answers to some of those questions, Pete.
Brilliant, Emma. That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. And just in relation to the specifics around those with poor mobility, what sort of advice do you give to people who are struggling with poor mobility? For me, it seems to be whatever you do, it'll help. But is there general advice you give to people who are struggling with mobility?
Yeah, as I say, I've learned a lot doing this session. So I think, I suffer with some musculoskeletal problems myself, and there's some exercises that I just can't do. So I do acroaerobics, for example, and that does include some resistance. And you can see that the guidance is a little bit different. So it talks about exercises that particularly affect your strength and balance for 2 days a week. Some exercises might be chair-based. There are a number of activity groups. Age UK also run activity groups. I think it's tailoring it to the individual, and I think anybody can do some exercise. It might need to be tailored, it might need to be adapted, but all of that exercise will be a positive and helpful thing.
Yeah. So basically, whatever your condition, there's chances are there's something useful you could do in exercise, and somebody's looking into that. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. So the next question was around muscles. So I'll let you dive in here, Emma, because I think this was a question about muscle tone as a predictor of good health.
Yeah, this was quite a taxing question, but one of the ones that I enjoyed researching the most. So I've struggled a little bit with exactly how to answer it. I mean, we know that one of the there are various ways of testing muscle function, from things like the strength of our hand grip. My hand grip strength is not great. There are graphs showing what normal hand grip strength is, and it is linked to longevity and mortality. But so I kind of was thinking about this whilst doing my acroaerobic session last night. I thought, well, what about the ultimate people who would have good muscle mass and good muscle tone? And I thought, well, what about athletes? And surprisingly, yet interestingly, there was a publication. It was in The Guardian last year, and it was information from the International Longevity Centre in the UK and the Bayes Business School. And who knew that the Commonwealth Games keep records of their athletes? And what they found was that the title of the article, of the piece of work was "Marathon, Not Sprint: Do Elite Athletes Live Longer on Average?" And what they found was that, on average, men who took part in aquatics, track, indoor sports lived on average 5 years longer. Women, all sports, increased their life expectancy. I haven't noted this down, but I think off the top of my head it was around 3 years. Interestingly, cycling was the only exception, but they did say that further work was needed. And it might be due to other impacts on life expectancy with cycling, so for example, accidents, etc. Wrestling was better than boxing. So I think what that shows, and I'm not suggesting that the participants in this take up any particular activity, but what it does show is that muscle tone strength is important. And I'm going to talk a little about something, I mentioned it earlier, something called sarcopenia. So that is a disorder of muscle where you get accelerated loss of muscle bulk and function, and it is linked with poorer outcomes such as falls, frailty, dying earlier. And the recommendations are that you need to look for the causes. It is not, it's more common in older people, but it's not necessarily a normal part of aging. And there is evidence for benefits of resistance type exercises and also for nutrition, but not nutrition alone. There's quite a lot of debate about what dietary changes are helpful and maybe the timing, the distribution throughout the day. There is actually research going on looking at the timing of the exercise that you do, and maybe sort of more evening time may be more beneficial in terms of your muscle and your tendon function. There is a consensus around increasing protein intake in older people. There are no specific drugs for the treatment, and the key message is that taking care of your muscles, building your muscles, taking part in regular physical activity, optimizing your diet at an earlier age is helpful. But again, to re-emphasize, it is never too late.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma. So now we come on to a big subject around diet. We had a ton of questions on this because it's something that I guess we all struggle with these days. So some of the questions that you posed to Emma: what's more important in aging, diet or exercise? Which is one of those great questions that's quite difficult to answer, but we'll try and get into that. And issues around vitamin supplements. Is that a healthy practice for people as they grow older? And talking about the changes in people's bodies as they get older in terms of how they metabolize substances like glucose and so on, and whether that should affect what they do in terms of diet. So we had some really challenging questions. So again, I'll pass back to Emma to give us the benefits of her wisdom on this.
So I'm going to try and answer most of them. The first answer is, and I think you probably know what it's going to be, is both diet and exercise. We haven't teased out one being better than the other. There are also definite physiological changes in how we metabolize metabolism in our bodies, including metabolism of various medications. This is a public health guide. In fact, I'll include some of the references with, I think we're also giving links out about how to get involved in research. But this is from Public Health England, and it's an Eat Well guide. And it's a really nice infographic talking about basically a balanced diet. There is guidance on, choosing whole grain, higher fiber versions of foods, looking at the amount of added fat, salt, and sugar. I mean, some cereals, you look at the side of the packet and they have a lot of sugar in them. So choosing more sugar-free options. Eating a variety of fruit and vegetables every day. I think one message that's got out well is the 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day. Also eating more beans and pulses and sustainably sourced fish. less processed meat, and lower fat and lower sugar options. And there's also guidance about the types of oils and spreads, about some of those treats sort of less often in smaller amounts like chocolate and crisps, etc. And also sort of in terms of fluids, more water, lower fat milk. That's a really easy change to make. This is for a healthy diet. It's important to say that some people with certain health conditions will need, different proportions of protein, or different amounts of fat. So this is just a general sort of eat well guide. Hopefully I can, first technical hitch. Oh, there. Moved on. Yeah. So one of the key questions that really gives researchers, dietitians, other healthcare professionals a little bit of a headache is about protein intake, because the amount of protein in our diet and how the body uses it does change when we get older. So might not eat enough, the body might not use all the available protein, for example, like insulin resistance, diabetes. There's a greater need for protein if you become well, or if you have particular conditions. And so there is something called the Prot Age Group that came up with some recommendations and found that protein intake requirements are different in older people, but the exact amounts, there is general guidance, but there's ongoing research around that. But the key recommendations that were that to maintain your physical activity, older people do need a bit more dietary protein than younger people. People who have a disease process need more dietary protein. There are exceptions. So if you have severe kidney disease and aren't on dialysis, then we tend to lower the amounts of protein in those people's diets because the kidneys can't process the protein. The protein quality, the timing of when you take it in, should be considered, and there is more research needed. Combination of protein intake and exercise, again, hearing that again, physical activity is recommended, but the general message is we need much more research on types of protein. Vitamins is a really good question. I think if you eat a balanced diet, you generally should get sufficient levels of all vitamins. The exception is vitamin D, and that is particularly, we get it through sunlight, it's made in our skin, and it's necessary for healthy bones and muscles. And this was a new one to me. I always remembered that everybody north of Birmingham in the UK is likely to be deficient in vitamin D, but actually the NHS guidance says that everybody should consider taking a daily vitamin D supplement during the autumn and winter. So I would definitely recommend seeking some medical advice. I take a vitamin D supplement for other health purposes, but that's quite a common thing, and it definitely does have some health benefits.
Thank you, Emma. Can I just come back to you on the graphic you showed? And you talked about protein being different with older people. Is generally that graphic true for everyone, that we should all be following that diet? Or apart from the protein, are there any other changes that people should consider when they're getting older?
Gosh, that is a good question. I guess following the healthy diet, but I think it also, sorry, I know there are dietitians in the audience. I'm thinking carefully of what I say. I think a balanced diet, I think it's also, I think we probably, as healthcare professionals, as a geriatrician, I'm very aware of the importance of diet in well-being, in health. There's a really, really good resource for Greater Manchester. I can't remember the exact name, but something like Healthy Eating, Eating Well. And it gives lots of tips, because there's other changes that happen as we get older. Our appetite reduces. We might not feel like eating such a big meal.
Yep.
So there's other tips like how you can make sure it can become more important to get those calories. And so eating potentially smaller meals with higher calories. Also, eating and drinking is a really something that people get concerned about for people with dementia, when people forget to eat or drink. And again, that's a really useful resource, the Greater Manchester Healthy Eating Resource. I may not have got the name absolutely right, and I know there will be people in the audience shaking their heads, but there's diet important, and yes, it does need tailoring. And I picked out the group of people with things like kidney disease. There are some exceptions to those rules.
Okay, brilliant. That's great. So we'll move on to the next section, which is about brain health, which is a huge subject. So we're going to sort of dip a toe into this. So one of the questions we had, which I really liked for this, is any evidence that healthy diet helps with mental health when aging? And I suppose that's part of a broader discussion about how you maintain health in the brain, and the way you think and so on and so forth, memory and so on. So anyway, Emma, let us know.
Yeah. So there's quite increasing awareness that we need to think not just about the health of our heart, but the health of our brain. And there is quite a lot of that we can do around that. The public health messaging is kind of moving in that direction as well. But this is a diagram from a Lancet paper showing that, I mean, genes definitely have a role, and sometimes there are some types of dementia that run very definitely in families, and many people in this audience will know, or have a relative dementia. So genes definitely plays a role, but there is quite a lot of, almost half of your risk for dementia is potentially modifiable. Some of those things might surprise you, some less so. I mean, things like smoking, excess alcohol, obesity, are not helpful, but other things might be a bit more surprising, such as hearing loss. So there's evidence that if you have hearing loss but that you don't correct it, that can increase your risk. The other thing that I wanted to mention is a particular passion of mine, and I couldn't not mention it, but delirium is something that people, it's when people become acutely confused. It's commoner when people get older, and it happens when somebody is physically unwell. So if they got an infection or constipation or another illness, the first sign can be becoming more confused than normal. But we know that about a third of that delirium can be prevented through things like making sure that you're eating and drinking plenty, making sure that you don't get constipated and your bowels are moving, in hot weather, making sure you don't get dehydrated. And also diet is a healthy diet. All of this is potentially a talk in itself. I was just picked out something that I just thought might be of interest to people. So this is a study carried out by a geriatric medicine trainee, a doctor called Mary Nylock-Lane, and she published a study just a few weeks ago. She is involved in research in London with twins, and what they did was they gave people a probiotic supplement. It was over 12 weeks, and they did find improved cognition. And so sorry, I didn't explain what the microbiome is. So we have various healthy bacteria within our stomachs and bowels, and probiotics can help kind of supplement that and diversify the healthy bacteria in our bowels. And so it looks like those bacteria, that there is a link between that and our cognition. So I know I've just kind of skirted around the edges with some of that, but it's such a big area. But there's definitely links with diet. There's definitely things that we can do to reduce our risk of dementia.
Yeah, and quite a positive message, I guess, from that Lancet article, suggesting there are things within our gift to reduce our risk of these problems. So again, quite a positive message from that. So next one's around women's health, and I think we had quite a specific question on women's health. So Emma, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, really passionate about women's health, and this is an area that I'm ashamed to admit that I probably was not as knowledgeable as I should have been. And I think it's come about because there have been, various sort of celebrities raising awareness around the menopause. I know I've shown you covers of a few books, and this isn't like this webinar is not about product placement, but I came across this online. I do remember going to a talk on what geriatricians need to know about the menopause, because clearly the women I'm looking after have been through the menopause potentially decades earlier. And I came across this, which is recommended, and I will be getting it and having a read of it. But there's some lack of awareness and lack of understanding around the impact of vaginal dryness. So that's when women who are peri or postmenopausal will become sore or itchy down below. They may get pain or discomfort during sex. They might feel that they need to go to the toilet and pee more than usual. And the environment in the vagina is such that it can predispose you to more urinary tract infections, or some of these symptoms might be misdiagnosed as urinary tract infections. Now, again, it would be a talk in itself, but there are treatments that are available to help with this, including things like topical estrogen. And I think for the person who did ask that question, there is some good resources on the NHS website, and I would say, don't suffer in silence. There are potentially things that can be done around this, and I think we definitely, as healthcare professionals, probably under-recognise some of this.
Right, thank you for that. So the next questions around LTCs, which is a short term for long-term conditions, which is things like diabetes, heart disease, and so on, and something called multimorbidity or multiple long-term conditions, which is for those who have lots of these conditions. And there's increasing numbers of people who face life living with more than one long-term condition. So we had a question, and I'll read this one out because somebody asked, why, when the focus is on healthy aging, are older people's problems not taken as a whole and treated in a more logical manner? Well, whoever came up with that question, that's a question that is very much at the forefront of the National Institute for Health Research. And they've got a huge program on this issue because the issues that you've identified are exactly what a lot of older people are saying, that they find the system chaotic and disorganized, and it's not treating them as a total, as a whole person. So that's a great question. So Emma, tell us about the latest in multiple morbidity and multiple long-term conditions.
Yeah, definitely receiving more attention. And also, Professor Chris Whitty has recently been mentioning more
Yep.
about this, how we need to adapt our services to look after people who have a number of long-term health conditions. So this shows that multimorbidity increases as we age. And so when you get to your 80s, 90s, there are people, with 8 or more disorders, and you can imagine some of the medications that people will be on. That's another talk in itself. And sometimes you can end up on medications that cause other problems, or there might be potential interactions. So there's another area that I sort of that's part of my work called deprescribing, where we're looking to make sure that people still need all the medications that they're on. There's a link, as you might expect, between multimorbidity and frailty. So this just shows that as the number of long-term conditions goes up, you're more likely to the higher proportion of people who are frail. The British Geriatric Society, which is a society of healthcare professionals who work with older people, has created quite a lot of reports in this area. So one is around having people who are experts in dealing and looking after people who have comorbidity who are older, but also sharing that knowledge and learning with other healthcare professionals, because there just essentially aren't enough of us. And this is just one example. So health services, some are better adapted than others, but it's definitely something that various services are needing to think of, especially as some treatments are getting better. So for example, I know in Greater Manchester, and there are other areas, there are clinics for people with silver clinics for people with HIV, because treatment for HIV has moved on so much in the last few decades. Those people are living, healthy, long lives, and need care in the context of their longer term condition. So absolutely, and it makes our health services, more tailored to the individual, more cost effective. And so whoever asked that question, it is definitely in the minds of a number of people, particularly people like myself, sort of geriatricians and other people who work with older people, but also large amount of research going on in this area.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And just, I mean, you mentioned Chris Whitty. So before he was his big role in COVID, he was very much thinking about older people, aging, and so on. And just as a plug, he did a lecture at the University of Manchester as part of the centenary, 200 years of at Manchester, and that's available. And that was an excellent introduction to his thinking on growing old in England and across the UK, and what we can do about it. So if you get a chance and you're interested to hear what Chris has got to say, it would really was an excellent lecture, and you touched on a lot of the issues that Emma's touched on today. Okay, we're moving on now to health screening. So, as somebody said in one of their questions, so many illnesses can be treated if found early, but how do you know if you have something when the symptoms are mild at the beginning and you put it down to getting old? Which is a really good question. And another question was about NICE guidance. So NICE sets clinical guidelines for the health services, and they'll be talking about when people should get screened and so on. So there was a question about NICE guidance as well. So Emma, over to you.
Yeah, so yeah, that first question really kind of got me thinking. I mean, there are some symptoms that there has been quite a lot of public health messaging about. So, you know, if you start to see sort of blood in your urine, or you start sort of your bowels habits sort of suddenly sort of change, or you started to cough up blood or losing a lot of weight, those are the things to seek advice about. But I guess it's sometimes when they are mild or non-specific symptoms, and you know, we always hear, like as clinicians, of those cases where the symptoms are very non-specific, and you know, always trying to make sure that we don't miss something more sinister or something cancerous, when the right thing to do in terms of treating that patient in the context of, you know, for example, if that they are severely frail, making sure that we're doing the right things and do carrying out person-centered care through discussing the options with that person. So there are lots of national screening programs. They have been kind of selected, and the age group selected for the greatest benefit. So it's encouraging people to continue to participate in them. And there have been, you know, celebrities such as Jade Goody, you know, sort of campaigning around cervical screening, and her sort of experience in sadly dying from cervical cancer. But, you know, the breast, there's bowel. I guess many people watching this might have had those little pots coming through the post to send off stool samples to help detect colorectal cancer earlier. There's also the abdominal aortic aneurysm screening program. There's actually a committee, the UK National Screening Committee, that advises the NHS on all of this. There are online tests offered by private companies. One of the people who asked one of the audience member questions was around a specific test. And what I would say is that there just isn't enough evidence that the benefits of such tests outweigh the harms. I couldn't comment on the specifics of those particular ones that some of the audience members referred to, though. That's it. Sorry, quite a short answer for probably what's a very big topic.
Yes, it is. So we're kind of coming towards the end of the session. I'm keen to have a go at the Q&A as well. So we've got a couple more. I think there's one here on research into practice, which is a really, really good question, which was about how can we better convey our findings about healthy lifestyles to the public so that they can act on them more quickly. So Emma.
Yeah. I mean, lots of campaigns. I guess we could always say that, you know, there's lots of different areas where there's public health messaging, and there's, you know, winter campaigns from like Age UK, or sort of drinking more fluid over the summer, various other campaigns. I don't know if you know, but the WHO, UN, there's something called the Decade of Healthy Aging, with a lot of initiatives as part of that. There's also in Greater Manchester Doing Aging Differently, and it's it's not just about healthcare, it's about healthy living, about jobs, about housing, about transport. And I'm just going to move straight into the final question in the interest of time, so we can move on to some of the Q&A in the chat. Somebody asked, what's the one thing that I can do to contribute towards healthy aging? This is a picture of my daughter, and I think it just it epitomizes for me the message of this talk, is that thinking about healthy aging, it's never too late and it's never too early. If I had to say one thing, and after we've been all sitting for an hour, I know you'll all be shifting in your seats, and I bet you now you've seen the one easy thing is standing up. So it's sort of breaking up any sedentary behaviour. But the other things, because hopefully people will allow and humour me, it's about getting active, it's about spreading the word, it's about realising it's never too late. You know, a bit like smoking, it's never too late to give up smoking, it's never too late to start physical activity. I haven't had many questions about social interaction. or well-being or friendship or sort of loneliness. But that is a really, really important area. And then the final bit, particularly because it's the NIHR, is to take part in research. So I will stop sharing my slides.
Brilliant. So thank you so much, Emma, for that. You covered a huge amount of territory very effectively. I hope that answered a lot of the questions that people had. Some really big topics there. So thanks to Emma for grappling with that. So just looking at the Q&A, so we've got some questions in there. One of them was around screening. And I just wanted to pick that up because that was one of, and somebody asked about routine cancer screening and why it stops at a certain age in the early 70s. And I suppose it's partly that, coming back to those screening committees, that they're making judgments about screening, and screening's not always a good thing. I think that's something that they always say, that there are downsides to screening, and we have to be careful that we don't overuse it as well as underuse it. But if you've got any views on that, Emma?
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions asked me about a screening test where, and I don't even know, like, I couldn't see that this was medically possible. It was a test that tested for multiple different types of cancer, and I am not familiar with that kind of that brilliant test because it's not something we would use clinically, and I don't think there is such a test as that. It's all about kind of what's the chances of the test being positive when there is really something there, which you want it to have a high chance of positivity. And if it's negative, you want there to be a low risk of missing something. So it's all about those probabilities and what the most common ages are to get certain conditions and when the most benefit would be gained. It's all about also about thinking of what interventions are available, what treatments are available. For example, there was been discussion over the years about screening for dementia, and actually that's coming more to the forefront in that there's on the potential horizon some possible newer treatments. There's research funding going into looking for a biomarker, a blood test that might help you pick up dementia. But then there's some really big questions about, well, who do you test? When do you test? Do you have a treatment that can be offered? When do you start giving that treatment? What are the costs of that treatment? So it's a really, really complex area. So, and I guess when we talk screening, there's so many different conditions that it could apply for. But we will have taken part, all of us will have been screened for conditions alive. The heel prick test in babies, my family benefited from detection of an inherited metabolic disease because of the heel prick test. But that wasn't available in the until it was discovered in the 1960s. So it's all about, and there's various other things that can be tested on the heel prick, but you do have to think, well, what are the chances of picking something up?
Mm-hmm.
And then how much is it going to cost to test everybody for that? And taking everything in the round and kind of looking at, I can't imagine how difficult the UK screening committee's job must be in making some of those decisions, but they're the experts and not me.
Yeah. So Carla asked about the age statistics you presented at the start and talked about what do they look like for those with long-term disability. Is that something that you can talk to, Emma? I know that's quite a complicated question.
Gosh, it probably would. There probably are statistics, but I wouldn't be able to. I mean, Pete, you might, if you have anything that
No,
springs
I
to mind
don't.
and answer
No,
that. I can't think. That's a really good question.
it is a good question. I think one we'd have to go back to the library for.
Yeah,
but
I
that's
think
fine.
we would.
That's fine. I think patients always ask us questions that we struggle with, and that's good because it encourages us to look at these. There's a really good question here from Jennifer who talks about any difference between exercising alone or in groups.
That is a good question. And I know there are people in this audience that will know the answer to that question, but
Yes.
it's all about with physical activity. Yeah, I can see some particular names on my screen. But it's all about encouraging people to take part in physical activity. And so that there is research about increasing people's participation, making it something that's easier to do. I think what was interesting about looking at those blue zones is that those areas, the activity is part of day-to-day life. So it's not like people have to kind of make an effort to go and get on an exercise bike or go down to the gym. It's part of day to day what they do, which I think, perhaps is a bit more difficult in some of, Western societies. So, and my own experiences, it's definitely always more fun and more encouraging and more motivating to do something in a group.
Mm-hmm.
But
if you can't do it in a group, yeah. And
you can still do it on your own in your chair.
You're going to benefit. No, absolutely. So again, looking at some of these, there's a question about, is poor lifestyle, lack of exercise and diet reversible? So if you started off in life with poor exercise, lifestyle and diet, can you turn that around later on? That's a good
Well,
question.
some of the evidence about the shifts in frailty are that you can. We used to think that you, as I say, you would move in one
Yep.
direction and then you would not be able to sort of reverse that degree of frailty. But there's definitely evidence there, and I'm sure there are that there's evidence, isn't there, around sort of weight gain and diabetes risk. So again, it's just emphasizing that message. There's never no point in doing something when it
Yeah.
comes to physical activity, improving your diet. There
Yeah.
probably is lots of research out there for various different areas, but off the top of my head, it would be a whole other
No.
presentation.
No, absolutely. But I think that common message, which is essentially
Yeah,
as early as possible, but it's never too late.
yeah,
Never think you've reached an age where you can't benefit from exercise. And we
absolutely.
had a couple of one in the Q&A. Somebody mentioned, I mean, obviously we're not doing product placement around books, but somebody mentioned a book called The Book About Getting Older by Lucy Pollock.
Ooh,
There's
yeah,
tons of stuff,
it is.
loads of
Well,
books, people
I'm
writing about these
delighted
issues.
whoever's mentioned that. It's a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
good book. It's one of my geriatrician colleagues,
Oh, really?
and
Oh, okay.
yeah, yeah. And I had her to do a book club with them during sort of COVID. I set up some book clubs. There's some really, it's very, very readable. Some real practical advice. It covers a lot of different areas. Useful for anybody who is either getting older, worried about getting older, looking after, or has a family member who's getting older. It covers a lot of topics through from healthy aging to managing some of the common conditions of older age through to dying, because there's 100% certainty we will all die at some stage. Again, that's another whole topic in itself. But having conversations with our loved ones about dying and what we would want at the end of our lives, really important. So yeah, it's a really good book. And there's another one on its way that I don't know if she's finished writing it yet or is about to come out.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And last one, I mean, Derek's asked about brain training games in the aging brain. Do you know anything about that? The use of those sorts of games to support healthy brain aging? Is that something that you can talk to?
You know what? I know a little bit about this. Again, there's people in the audience, but one of our we have some postdoctoral researchers in Greater Manchester doing work in dementia, and Jahida, one of those postdoctoral students, is doing some work around with COCU, developing it for people with dementia, but it's also got a brain health aspect to it. And the reason I know that there is some validity in it is because we looked at all the different risk factors and put it into this game to kind of help with some of that kind of messaging. So yeah, kind of keeping your brain active, Sudoku, puzzles can be helpful.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm aware of time, so I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's Q&A, but we tried to get through most of those. Thank you so much for that input. So I'm going to bring the session to a close. So first, I'd like to thank Emma, who I know put a ton of work into preparing for tonight. So thank you so much. We can't do a round of applause, but I hope everyone will join me in saying thank you so much for all the effort and for answering all the questions. Really insightful, really informative. As Emma said, and throughout, there's lots of things we don't know, and we're only going to know those if we do more research. So again, we'd advise you, if you're interested in learning about research and taking part in research, please go to the Research for the Future website, which is a local Greater Manchester and Northwest affair, or the Be Part of Research, which is a national website. They both are listed in the emails we sent you. If you want to find out more, if you want to take part in research, get involved. We would encourage you to do so, because you ask all these great questions, we don't have the answers, and the only way we can get those answers is by encouraging more people to take part in research, some of which Emma's talked about tonight. You will be sent a recording of tonight's event. There's also an evaluation form, and I know everyone's kind of, oh, another evaluation form, but they are immensely useful to us, because if you like the session, tell us and we'll do more. And if there's things you didn't like about the session, tell us and we'll make some changes as we go forward. So if you get a chance, we would be really delighted if you'd fill those out. So thank you so much for coming along. Thank you so much for all all your interesting and intriguing questions. It made the session much more just great for us. Really pushed us in good ways. But I just want to thank everyone for coming along. I hope you enjoyed the session, and we'll be emailing you with the recording and some other details in due course. I'll let you get away to the rest of your evenings, and hopefully we'll all see each other again at some point in the future. Thank you so much.